Okay, good. Chapter 14. The One Who Is Many. This oxygen destroyer, why hasn't Monster Zero affected by it? Foster asked. I mean, I'm no scientist, but I bet it has something to do with his freaking head growing back, Barnes stated. Well, I never seen anything like it. It violates everything we know about the laws of nature, Rick said. Agreed. Nothing on this planet has ever had such powerful regenerative properties. Not even Godzilla, Dr. Graham added. Aline, who had been sitting with Mark after the chat, looked to the side as a thought crossed her mind. She rolled her chair a bit closer to her station and inserted an external drive to the computer with her family's personal files. Generation after generation of her family had compiled information from throughout the millennium since the Titan appeared, and as such, she hadn't seen everything yet, but she knew that there had to be something about this monster Zero in those files. One of her ancestors must have known something. So hold on, wait a minute. Is he a new species? Maybe? Barnes asked. No, he can't be that new. Not with how old the samples we took from him in the ice were, Rick retorted. And how old were they? Barnes asked. 10 of thousands of years old. And those were the samples we were able to preserve, Rick added. Damn, so he's been around, Barnes said. There must have been something in our records, Dr. Graham. Please check again, Sirizawa asked. Of course, he said, going to a station and looking through the Monarch files. Mark, meanwhile, stayed near Eileen as she combed through files she had never opened before, scanning subfolders after subfolders with her eyes wide open as not to miss a single folder name or clue that might be hiding. What are you doing? Mark asked. These are my family's private records. Monarch agreed to leave some things private for us, but sometimes even families keep things from each other's, she said as she opened one particular file about the day her village was attacked during her childhood. She paused an instant before moving to another folder. So his head's regrowing. Is it like the lizard thing? Barnes asked. No, lizards can only regrow their tails or something, even lost limb. But a head? That is not possible, Rick countered. Even Godzilla, as far as we know, has limits to his healing. Durable as he is, his brain is a central component for his healing factor. Damage his brain, and his ability to heal goes with it, Sam added. So, how do we kill this thing? Chop all of its head off? Burns asked. No, idiot. We'll blow it to Kingdom Come. How are we supposed to know how to kill that thing? Martins asked with a irritated sarcasm. I wasn't talking to you, Martins. I was talking to the scientists who know better, Barnes barked back. Oh hey, oh what? You'd think I don't know at least a little about this subject. I was a biology major in college, you know, Martins jabbed back. Hey, calm down, Rick snapped. Hey, I'm a soldier. If I don't know what I'm fighting for or how to kill it, how am I gonna do my jobs? Barnes asked. Just sit tight for a bit and let us discuss this. If we put our heads together, I'm sure we'll figure out what the hell's going on. Sooner or later, Sam tried to say calmly, hoping to defuse the situation. That is, if there is still a world left after this later that we're talking about, Rick said sarcastically. Elaine continued diving through her records until she found something. An unnamed photo with a single document inside it. Also unnamed. Her eyebrows furrowed and she opened the files. Inside was a single image and one line of text to accompany it. The image was that of Monster Zero, a three-headed glided dragon. It was at the top of the image, surrounded by a hail of meteors, and below him was the curvature and surface of the humans of Earth with tiny human figures drawn on it. Eileen's jaws went slack as she read the text. Ghidorah, the cosmic devil, and the one who is many. After a few seconds, something happened. The files automatically opened. I previously hidden an encrypted file, which had been coded to remain invisible until this file had been invisible. Clicking on it, Eileen was met by a code wall. She heaved a breath and cracked a finger as she began decrypting the file, and after a few moments, she was in. The files opened and revealed documents after documents of painting and stories all about this Ghidorah. Some of them would have to be translated. Others were already translated, and of those which were already translated, one of them came with an image of Godzilla facing Ghidorah, with humans battling on both sides. But what was the most disturbing was the text beside the image. As she read, the sounds of the arguing behind her began to fade to nothing. The day the devil fell to earth, the heaven fell with him. A hail of stars destroyed the lands for miles, heralding the coming of death incarnate. Its name is Ghidorah, the one who is many. We few who survived prayed to our gods for salvation, but salvation would not come. The devil's might proved far too great. One after another, the gods fell to his unholy powers over lightning and thunder. As he flew the skies, he created a tempest which swallowed the world, man and god alike. He cannot be stopped. Mark leaned in, his face beside her. What the fuck? He asked quietly. Lean breathed heavily as another file opened on its own, just like the first, but this one didn't need to be cracked. It was a prayer written by none other than Eileen's mother, dated shortly after Eileen and Ling's birth. O Heavenly Mother, whose wings shall shine bright as the sun, please hear my call and accept my sincerest love and reverence. The cosmic devil sleeps in ice, ready to awake and destroy this world. Your world. His power is great, such that he may turn your most beloved family against you. Please be careful, for his call is poison to the world. Eileen was speechless as she sat back in her chair for a moment. Mark put his hand on her shoulder, trying to get her to snap out of her stupor. A gentle squeeze brought her back, and she put her hand on his before offering a small smile. Then she turned to the others, who were still in the middle of arguing. Everyone shut up, she yelled. The room went silent, looking at her. Sorry. Please come here. You have to see this, she said, sitting down and projecting her screen so they could all read with her. I just found this hidden and encrypted in my family's personal database. It gives the name to Monster Zero. It tells us more about where he is from, she said quietly. Wait. Does that picture means what I think it means? Rick asked. Read the text, Rick. This Ghidorah, as they call it, fell to earth from the heavens, bringing the heavens with him. I'm betting those stars were meteors, which would explain the fragments we found on him during our initial attempt at gathering samples, Sam said. I can't believe it, Dr. Graham said in horror. Yes, it's hard to believe for me as well, but it's all here. Ghidorah fell from the stars, a devil, the incarnate of death. Like we saw earlier, when he flies, he generates a storm that follows him everywhere. Eileen said that could wreak havoc on our natural weather patterns and even potentially change climate across the world, Sarah stated in shock. Eileen nodded. Yes, Ghidorah is not part of our natural order. Would also explain how he was able to regrow his head so quickly, she said. Wait a sec. So you're telling me that the aliens I've been waiting for my entire life to meet are this Ghidorah fella? Rick asked. Eileen only looked at him over her shoulder. Well, shit, Rick said as he went back to his chair and started rummaging around beneath his desk. So he's an alien. That's what you're telling me. Barnes asked. Elaine nodded. Diam, he said. Not what you expected, Martins asked. Nah, man, I was expecting those little gray balloons head guys with big shiny eyeballs, Barnes replied. Martins rolled her eyes and shook her head. Doctor, we are approaching Castle Bravo, but there's something you should see, Foster said to Sarasawa. He joined Foster at the main viewing window, and all the part around Castle Bravos were dozens of military vessels. I suppose you weren't expecting a welcoming party, Mark asked almost playfully. Inside the Castle Bravos meeting room, Admiral Stans began his debrief. Moscow, London, Washington, D.C., all under attack. On every continent, the Titans are triggering earthquakes, wildfires, tsunamis, and other disasters we don't even have names for yet. As before, we've been trying to lure them away with nuclear materials, but they aren't taking the bait. This time, their behavior has become random, erratic, and with our forces now spread desperately thin and these things roaming the globe unimpeded, we are running out of options and time. As Dan spoke, Elaine looked at Mark and walked up close to whisper to him. Excuse me, do you have something to add? Stans asked the pair. Yes, we believe you're wrong, Elaine said. Their behavior is not random or erratic, she added. If I may, sir, as amazing as this sounds, they're all moving like pack, hunting as it were. And all the packs, from wolves to killer whales, they have all responded directly to an alpha, Mark said. The alpha used to be Godzilla, but with what we discovered about Ghidorah's origin, being cosmic in nature, everything we thought we knew before now has totally reevaluated, Eileen said. Dr. Chan's family found a text which translated that Ghidorah has a car that's poison to the road, and a prayer from her mother suggests that he can turn the Titans to his wills. Whatever this car is that he is meeting, that's what causing this. The Titans are all being bent to his will. They become an extension of him, Mark added. So what are you telling me? Stans asked. That this Ghidorah is an alien life form, and that he is here to subjugate, or to destroy this world. He's going to use the Titan to do it, Mark said. A false king forcing others to do his work for him, Serizawa concluded. If we stop Ghidorah, we stop them all, Mark finished. Is there any other creature that might stand a chance against him? Foster asked. Not anymore. Ghidorah and Godzilla's rivalry was ancient and unique, Serizawa stated. Right. So, we killed our best shot at beating this thing? A soldier asked. Mark looked to the soldier incredulously for a moment before a wave of nausea hit his stomach again, and he wandered off towards a nearby table to sit down and study himself. Elaine, noticing this, walked over and put his hand on his shoulder. You alright? She asked softly. Mark nodded. Yeah, I just needed a minute. He stepped back with a half smile. She nodded quietly, letting go of his shoulders before rejoining the others. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in the Monarch bunker. Jonah, you don't get it. This changes everything, Emma stated. With Godzilla gone, Monster Zero isn't using the Titans to restore the planet. He's using them to destroy it, she added. And what would you have me do? He asked. This isn't coexistence, Jonah. This is extinction. You expected the end result to be simple. I take it, he asked. What do you mean? She inquired in return. This might not be the ideal outcome you had in mind, but if Monster Zero is able to wipe out humanity and give the Earth back to the Titans and nature, then we have done our job, he replied. But Jonah, coexistence was our goal, she insisted. No, it was a goal, he said, turning and walking away a few steps. What are you talking about? We had an agreement about the endgame of this venture, she said. No, we had an agreement about the fact we both wanted to save the world by helping Earth fight the infection that is humanity. But I never agreed with you about anything that's more personal, such as why I wanted nature and the Titans to take this world back, he growled, pointing a finger at her and advancing towards her again. Emma backed against the wall as he closed the distance and got right up in her face. Sometimes, to do what's right, you need to get your hands dirty. We opened Pandora's box when we released Monster Zero, and there's no stopping it now. What I seem to recall you insisting that this world always belonged to the Titans, so maybe it's time we gave it back, hmm? He insisted. Emma slowly shook her head. We've all have a place here, humans and Titans alike. Yes, we need to make changes, but not like this. There has to be ways to stop Monster Zero and help humanity and Titans coexist. I'm sorry, Doctor, but there's no such solutions anymore. Maybe before the governments and military killed off Godzilla, we had a chance, but now with him gone, Monster Zero has no more natural enemies who stand even the slightest chance at killing him. He's the best tool this planet has to heal now, like it or not. When did you get this way, Jonah? She asked. What way? You're telling me with full honesty to my face that you believe Monster Zero is the world's best chance for survival now. And with what? He's making the Titan do all over the world? Just look at the screens. Titans are being used, Jonah. Used. That's not coexistence. That's slavery. And what do you think he'll do with them when he's done? I don't care, Jonah yelled, silencing Emma. I don't bloody care what he does with the Titans, so long as he rids this world of of the infection that is humanity. I'll consider my mission a success, he said, storming away down the halls. Emma let out a held breath, slumping to the floors. Chapter 15. Catharsis. A Kinglet Lives. Back inside Cavo Bravo's war room, Admiral Stans held a private conversation with Colonel Foster while Mark and the others waited nearby. Stans is really stubborn, Rick whispered. Admiral Stans, Rick. Show the proper respect, Sarah replied firmly. Sorry, Admiral Stans, Rick repeated. Sarazawa shifted his weight in his chest, still slouching silently as he glanced to the flatline reading of Godzilla's life sign. In another chair, not far away, sat Mark, elbows on his knees, hunched forward, finger interlaced with his knees, and deep in thoughts. Elaine sat next to him, occasionally glancing between him and Sarazawa. Meanwhile, Dr. Graham sat beside Sarazawa, trying in vain to cheer him up. Huh, Rick chuckled. Mark glanced to him. Something funny, he asked. No, nah, not really funny, Rick replied, digging around his feet. What was the chuckle for? That thing, Ghidorah, is driving the Titan to destroy us. The big guy's gone, and we still don't have the Orca, Rick said, finally seeming to get what he was after as a smile crept on his face. Given that the world's going to hell, I figure now was a good time as any to bust these out. Originally, I was saving them for when the big guy kicked Ghidorah's ass, but now, well, what do you say? Want a beer? He asked, holding a fresh bottle out towards Mark. Elaine glanced slowly to Mark, her lips parting ever so slightly. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He felt a lump gather in his throat. His hand gripped one another tightly, and a bead of sweat slowly floated from his temple and dripped down to the floor below. His heartbeat pounded in his ears like a thundering war drum as he looked at the bottle with longing. Slowly, his left hand unlaced the finger from the right and started gliding towards the bottle, but then it stopped. Mark's jaw hung slightly agape as he fought for breath and swallowed the lump in his throat. Clenching the hand into a fist, he brought it back to rest on his thigh. I'm good, he said, his voice laced with pain. You sure, man? You look like you could really use some. Rick began. I'm good, Mark yelled, standing to his feet. Whoa, whoa, sorry, Rick stuttered. Mark took a deep breath and nodded. Sorry about that, he whispered. Yeah, no problem. Well, bottoms up, Rick said, popping the bottle cap and chugging the beverage. Mark placed his hands on the main table monitor and breathed as Eileen slowly walked over and placed her hands on his shoulders. Are you alright? She asked softly. He nodded. If you don't mind. What was that about? She whispered. Mark slowly glanced at over at her, the sight of his eyes beginning to shimmer with moisture and his tight pushed up lips made her heart sink. I guess I never told you or the others, did I? That I became an alcoholic after San Francisco, he whispered. She slowly shook her head as a gentle grip on his jacket tightened slightly. Well, I was, he said, sniffing back a sob. His tears slowly leaked from the corners of his eyes as his hands clenched tighter. After we moved back to Boston, I had no other outlet. I couldn't focus on studying anymore because every time I saw one, I was reminded of how much Andrew loved them. He always had to have the latest National Geographic magazine or records the latest animal documentary airing on TV. He continued, chuckling through a few sobs as his breath grew more ragged. He loves nature so much, maybe even more than me, he sobbed, dipping his head as his tear gathered on the monitor screen between his hands. Eileen's hand gently rested on top of his clenched fist, and his hand flattened out in response to her touch. It's not your fault, Mark, she whispered. He couldn't respond to her through his sobs. Every time he tried to reply, his voice got caught in a hitched breath before he lost himself to his grief once again, and continued sobbing. In response, Eileen gently rested her head, against his shoulder, and used her others to rub his back, which seemed to not only have something of a positive effect as his sobs began to at least come more under control. It's not your fault, she repeated quietly. Andrew sounds like he was a good boy, full of life and love for this planet. You must be so proud of the young man he was becoming, she whispered. He nodded fervently. I was, he gasped through another sob. I was proud, so proud, and so was Maddie and Emma. We all were, he continued. She nodded. Do you think your son would blame you for what had happened? That he would blame any of this on you? She asked. He shook his head as silent. I don't know. I don't think he would. And do you know why? She asked as she leaned down, offering a smile. I think I think Andrew loved you very much, Mark. And a family's love transcends any boundaries the human mind is capable of producing, she whispered, taking her hands off his on the table and reached down to place it over his heart. He's still with you, Mark, she whispered. Suddenly, the sound of a glass shattering behind them made them both of them turn around. Rick had knocked the first bottle he had finished to the ground. Oops, my bad. Sorry, he announced to the numerous irritated face. As Rick began chugging the next bottle, Eileen shook her head and looked back at Mark, who was now transfixed on the sight of Rick drinking. Mark? She asked, gently tugging his jacket. Mark watched Rick drinking, and drinking. And finally, Mark blinked and was standing in his home in Boston, over the fridge in his kitchen. There he was. Behind him was 5 empty bottles of beer, with the sixth one now at his lips as he stumbled about the kitchen. And that's when Emma arrived. Mark, please, You've had enough for today, she shouted, trying desperately to make him drop the bottle. Mark yelled in anger, and as Emma tried to hold his arm, threw her backward against the wall as he struck her head on the edge of the cabinet, the blow immediately producing a small stream of blood from the back of her head when she tried to stop putting pressure on it. Domta! Ma, drink! Emma, he stammered drunkenly. Emma looked over to the side, glancing her free hand over her mouth as her eyes went wide, Mark following her graze. And that was Maddie, staring up at him with wide eyes and jaws hanging open, a deer caught in the headlights. His baby girl was scared of him. His beautiful, happy baby girl. Maddie, he asked. Maddie turned and in the slow motion disappeared as everything faded to black. Mark's eyes opened and he finally noticed Elaine asking if he was alright. He looked at her and gave a few brief nods, sniffling back a sob as he looked over at the flat line reading at Godzilla's vital on another monitor. As he took his first step towards it, Elaine seemed to realize what was happening as she let go of his jacket and gave him space. Step after step resounded in his head as if they were the only sounds in the world, and at last he arrived at the monitor, placing his head on top of it as his lips tightened and spread while he fought back and more sobs. I'm sorry, he whispered, sniffling back another sob. You didn't tear my family apart. I did, he admitted at last. Sarasawa looked over at Mark from his chair and slowly stood up. Mark, while continued to sob as his hand gripped the top of the monitor more tightly, causing the screen to fluctuate and color under his thumb. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Godzilla, he repeated. The fight with the Mutos took my son, but my drinking drove my wife and daughter away, he said through gasped sobs. I'm so sorry, he repeated once again, gripping the monitor with both hands as he slumped to his knee and cried against the table. Elaine's eyes welled up as she slowly walked up behind him, a soft, quiet smile on her face. Sari as Sarizawa as well couldn't help but began to tear up as he walked towards Mark, followed by Dr. Graham and Sam, while Rick continued drinking in the background. They all gave him space, but gathered around, smiling to one another as they waited patiently for him to finish. Several long minutes later, Mark stood up and wiped his face off the tears. Mark, Sarizawa whispered. Mark turned to look at him, and Sarizawa extended a hand. After a moment of pause, Mark shook Sarizawa's hand. Thank you, my friend, Sarizawa whispered, as his first tear finally leaking free as he embraced Mark in a hug. Mark returned the embrace, nodding several times as he repeated the word, I'm sorry, over and over again. Sarizawa supported him as his legs began to grow weak again, and all the others came forward and rubbed his hands and his back while telling him that it was all right and that if he was still alive and if he could communicate freely with humans, Godzilla would forgive him. That thought brought what was almost inarguably the first real smile he worn in a long time. Finally, he stepped away from them. Sorry, he sniffed, wiping his nose. It's all right, Mark, Sarah affirmed. Yes, it's all right, Graham repeated. Are you okay? Aline asked, taking his hand in hers. Marx nodded, still smiling even though it was clear he was emotionally exhausted. I'm okay, he replied. So, do you still hate Godzilla? Sam asked. Dr. Graham gave his shoulder a little smack, but Mark only chuckled. No. How could I? He didn't put my family where we are now. Humans did, Mark replied. Sarasawa nodded once, firmly, and took a step towards him. So what's next for you, Mark? He asked. Mark slowly shook his head. He looked over towards Stans and Foster, who were discussing about something out of earshot. Whatever they plan to do seems like it's gonna be take a while. I just can't wait here anymore, he said, looking at Sarasawa. I need to find them, Sarasawa, he insisted. Sarasawa nodded slowly. Good luck, Mark, and stay safe, he said, giving Mark another handshake. Dr. Graham and Sam both shook his hand as well, but Aline continued holding his other hand, refusing to let go. I'll go with you, she said firmly. Mark was about to speak, but she put a hand up to his lip to silence him. No arguing, she said, a mischievous smile appearing on her lips. Mark chuckled and nodded. All right, he replied. He wasn't sure what it was about Aline, but he was happy she was with him. Something about her presence calmed her down, and the soft feeling of her fans wasn't bad either. A few minutes later, Mark and Eileen boarded a chopper, preparing to take off for the mainland, when Eileen suddenly sat up and straight and looked outside. What is it? Mark asked. Eileen didn't reply. Instead, she unbuckled her safety belt and hopped out of the chopper with Mark close behind. Hey, we need to go, he shouted above the rain. Eileen looked up towards the sky and removed her hood as rain pelted her face. She felt the temperature of the air increasing. Eileen? Mark asked, standing right beside her. He couldn't help but couldn't hear her above the roar of the wind and rain, but he was able to read her lips, and she told him to look. He followed her gaze, and he started seeing a light shine through the rain clouds towards the horizon. At first, he thought it was a simple break in the clouds, and that they were seeing the sun beginning to set. But the sun doesn't set upward. The light moved higher and higher from the low horizon to almost 45 degrees up from the position, and as it did, it grew stronger and stronger until Mark had to shield his eyes. Eileen closed her eyes calmly, smiling ear to ear and taking deep breaths as her heart rate increased rapidly. Music filled their minds, drowning the sounds of the falling rain. Mark looked at Eileen and saw her excitement building, and finally he could hear a loud shriek from the above as the clouds were literally blown away by the mighty wings of Mothra. Her body shone bright as the sun, turning an early evening sky into the dawn as her wing beat blew away all traces of the gathered storm clouds. The skies around her grew quiet and still, and only the sound of music and her flapping wings as she hovered above the water could be heard. Inside Castle Bravo facility, watching the main monitors, everyone was brought to awe, wondered by the sight. Beautiful, Sarisawa whispered. Aline rushed back down to the others, joining them as everyone continued to stare in wonder. What's happening? Dr. Graham asked of Aline. Aline only smiled. She's singing, she replied simply. Singing? Graham asked. Aline nodded. Just listen, she said. Everyone went as quiet as they listened to the audio feeds, and sure enough, Martha's calls echoed and flowed very much like a song. Each chord carried a slightly different pitch, length, and melodic arc. Wait, Mark said, listening a bit closer. What is it? Sarisawa asked. She's not singing. She's communicating, Mark said. How do you know? Graham asked. I've been listening to numerous species communicate with one another, and I know how a communicative call when I hear one, Mark said confidently, and I'll bet there's only one creature in this world who can understand a call, he continued. Gojira-da! Sarizawa exclaimed. Rick! Mark shouted. Yeah, give me a sec, Rick said, fumbling at his station and pushing two empty beer bottles out of his waist. Yep, I got it. It's weak. I'm picking up a response. I'll sync it to the audio feed, he said. A moment later, a long and agonized cry from Godzilla reverberated through the room. He's still alive, Elaine whispered happily. Can you track him? Sarah asked frantically. No, The signal's too weak, but maybe she can, Rick said, gesturing to Mothra on the screen. Sarah, how many nukes do we have? Mark asked. Why? Because we can help him, Mark replied. Sarah's lip curled into a smile and he gave a single firm nod. Chapter 16 Rebirth. All right, Bowman, take her down, the captain ordered. Dive the ship. Make depth 150, Bowman relayed to the crew. Good luck, Sam said through the monitor's audio as he elected to remain in Castle Bravo. Thanks, Sam. We'll need it, Mark replied. Aline was standing next to him and waved a quick peace sign to the others. But upon hearing Mark say, we'll need it, she paused and leaned over to look at him as if to ask, are you okay? Mark gave a little smirk and nodded. She put her hand on his back as they walked away, and the feed cut off. They're kind of a cute couple, actually, don't you think? Sam asked. Eh, Barnes muttered. Sam looked at Barnes for a moment, who then looked at Sam. What? Barnes asked. Nothing, Sam said, shaking his head and waving his head. The sub began its descent into the depth as the shining form of Mothra faded from view as darkness engulfed all. The silence which enveloped the crew was palpable. Mark could swear it was getting harder to breathe, and not from the increasing pressure of the ocean around the sub. Aline, to keep herself occupied, was scouring her family's private files once again, searching for anything she could about Ghidorah, Rodan, Mothra, and Godzilla. Even the smallest hint would help. Sarizara, meanwhile, looked at his pocket watch. What time is it? Mark asked, hoping to cut the tension. Time to get a new watch, Sarizara replied. Mark smirked. Andrew's favorite joke, he said quietly. Sarizara chuckled quietly. You never took that watch out of your pocket without him asking that question. Sarizara nodded. You know, if you asked me 5 years ago that I'll be trying to save the creature which took my son, that'll be the only way to save the family I have left, Mark amused. Sarizara looked away, but then leaned over the table next to Mark. Sometimes the only way to heal our wounds is to make peace with the demons who created them, Sarizara replied. Mark's smirk turned to a genuine smile. I guess you're right, he agreed. Sarizara turned around, sitting on the edge of the table. You know, Mark, there are things in this world beyond our understanding. We must be able to accept, and learn from them. Because in these moments of crisis are also moments of faith, and they work together to create moments in time where we'll either come together or fall apart. Nature, unlike humanity's, always has a way of balancing itself, and the only question is, he trailed off, putting his glasses back on, and after taking them off to clean them, what part will we play? He finished. Did you just make that up? Mark asked. No. I read that in a fortune cookie once, Sarizara joked, earning a laugh from Mark. A really long fortune cookie, he continued, starting to laugh himself along with Mark and some crew around him who have been listening in. Suddenly, the sub began to tremble and shake violently, causing the electronics to jitter. Status of the ship, the captain demanded. Some sort of vortex, Captain. It's dragging us 100,600 feet until impact. The sub was indeed being pulled into an understorm maelstrom and sucked down further into the depths of the ocean as it was tossed this way and that, spinning around and round. The crew all took to the seats as the body felt the g-force of the sub being tossed around like a rag doll. Several crew members lost their dinner, and Mark felt his stomach was being pushed against his ribcage as he held tight to his own seat safety belt. Aline, seated and strapped in next to him, grabbed his hand as they both struggled to remain conscious against the increasing G-force. 800, at 800 feet, Bellman called, his voice unsteady from his own struggle from the consciousness. Emergency blow! 200 feet! 100 feet! 25! Bellman called. Brace for impact! The captain began as a massive thundering thud shook the vessel. Deep beneath the wave, the sub sat on the edge of the sheer underwater precipice. The force of the vortex no longer threw the vessel around, but the subtle, almost gentle caress of the remnants of the vortex influence could still be felt brushing past the sub's hull. Serious report, the captain called. Can't fix our position, sir. The GPS is down. The inertia says we are 6,000 miles from departure, Bellman replied. That can't be, a crewman replied. I knew it, man. The vortex was a tunnel into the hollow earth, Rick exclaimed excitedly, his mild buzz from earlier having since worn off. It's a subterranean tunnel system that wraps around the entire planet and connects the various areas like it's a bit highway. But it doesn't matter. I knew I was right. I told you, Chan, he called to Aline. Shut up, Rick, she demanded, holding her stomach as she was still quite motion sick. 1 second emergency blow forward, the captain ordered. The sub's exterior lights flickered to life, and the sub was pushed forward by the blow and gently eased off the edge of the precipice. Doctor? The captain asked. Launch the probe, Serizawa said. A few moments later, the probes were launched from the sub. Small drone-like underwater scouts controlled via Rick's station, and those nearest him, as they took off, their feeds came back remarkably crystal clear despite where they were. Below the probes was the uneven terrain, scarred and barren, as if life had once lived here, but since been wiped out. Despite being underwater, it looked bone dry. Subaquatic stalagmites rising from the ground occasionally emerged from the gloom, forcing the probes to go around. The small coral reefs, miniature caves, and crevices everywhere. It was truly a new and unexplored world of modern science. Range 1,000 meters. Camera good? Rick stuttered to himself as he controlled his probe. The probe feed continued to show more of the same until the last the head and the face of a statue burst into view, nearly resulting in a crash. The sudden appearance caused Aline to stand up and lean away from the monitor, gently bumping into Mark, who stood partly behind her. She smiled nervously and gave a head bow of apology while she smirked and pat her shoulder. Jesus, Rick said quietly. Pan right, Mark whispered. As the probe backed away from the statue and pan right, an underwater city seemed to emerge before them. Small buildings, dwellings, and other enormous statues bordering the squared off entrance to this new world flanked the sub as it slowly crawled forward through the water. Around, all around were the massive pillars and the walls, almost as if there was a giant castle or temple built around them. And at this point, it wasn't hard to imagine that this was indeed the case. But what told them it wasn't quite accurate was the fact that the cave ceiling above them was cleared of the structure. They were still outside, whatever primary structure may lay ahead. Statues to left and right as they continued seemed to line their way forward, almost as if they were being guided. The statues put the subs to shame in terms of size, gazing down at it almost as if they were themselves titans. Had they been alive and able to move, the subs would be moving full speed the other direction. But ahead lay their path, and there was no turning back now. As the probes moved forward, there seemed to be natural subterranean and subaquatic light source, now illuminating the immense passage they were in. Bridges linking the two sides of the chambers with arches large enough for the subs to pass through lay ahead. The sheer scale and magnitude of the buildings was enough to, to give the entire crew pauses. Incredible, Mark whispered. How could they make things this big down here? How'd they get underwater in the first place? A crewman asked. There are many mysteries yet unsolved about this sacred place, Sarisawa whispered. Yeah, but why underwater? The same crewman asked. We don't know, man. But at this point, this place has never had. This place had to be clear of water. There's no way humans could build under the ocean like this without gills. And as far as we do know, our ancestor never had any, Rick replied. As the sub continued onward, one very important thing happened. An image carved into the walls beside the sub appeared, an image of no other than Godzilla. Beneath him, beneath him in the pyramid-like formation were humans bowing and worshipping him as the deity. The image confirmed many of the theories Monarch had come to adopt regarding the relationship between the earliest human civilizations and the Titans. But more than that, it also seemed to confirm the long time theory about humanity's singular origins, that all people once began life in one place before spreading through the world to establish culture and ethnic identities that held today. The presence of various runes and hieroglyphs of styles reminiscent of Egypt, Rome, Greece, and Japan were seemingly to appear at once in the carved writings on the walls. Dr. Stanton, can you locate Gojira? Serizawa asked. Yeah, the probe is picking up a radioactive blob just past that ridge, he replied. Set a course, Serizawa ordered. Continuing forward, the sub floated above, but what appeared to be an underwater river of lava. It almost looks like a river of flames, pulsing and flashing beneath them, and guiding the path forwards towards the projected location detected by the probe. And then, ahead of the sub, lays a massive ovular opening with an orange glow emanating from the deep within. I think we should stop here, Rick said. Why? Sarasa asked. Because I will still want to have kids one day, preferably without flippers, Rick replied. All stop. Hover the ship, the captain ordered. The sub halted its advance. The probes continued forward without it. However, as they entered the ovular opening, they all began they suddenly began to spark and malfunction. Whoa! Rick exclaimed. Yeah, we got O2, CO2, methane. Looks like there's some sort of air pocket in there. Rick's boat managed to surface and use its hover rotors to rise out of the water. The feet of the cavern were stark and ominous, lava pouring, flows pouring from the ceiling down into the chamber, but the only light it had helped to reveal the secret of the world beyond to the subs and her crew. And then, as it panned right, it beheld pyramid structure and Gojira. Serizawa whispered as Godzilla's spine, illuminated by the lava flows behind him, appeared on the screen. And then the feed cut. And good night, Gracie. Rick sighed. Pull up the last frame, Serizawa ordered. Yup, there. Rick replied. The final frame was shown, and from Godzilla's spines could be seen a soft glow against the light behind him. There, the source of the radiation, Serizawa stated as he pointed to the glow. He's feeding, Aline said, regenerating. This is his home, Serizawa said quietly to himself. This must be how he survived so long. Adapting, evolving. It's incredible, Mark whispered. So the big guy got this covered, right? He just needs a little nap, Rick asked. No, This process could take years for a creature his size to regenerate all the strength lost to the oxygen destroyer, Elaine countered. We have to proceed as planned, Sarisara stated. So hold on. We're going to launch a nuclear torpedo to revive a monster. This isn't like jump stunting a car, Rick said. We have another complication. Our weapon systems are damaged during crash. We can't launch, the captain said. Can it be repaired? Mark asked. I'm afraid not. Okay. What if we send someone inside? Set a timer and blow the warhead manually, Elaine asked. No way. If the hit doesn't frighten you, the radiation will. Just look at the Geiger reading, Rick said, pointing out to the reading on his screen. The room was engulfed in silence. So, there's nothing we can do, Mike asked. Doesn't look like it, Rick replied. There must be a way. Don't we have protective suit? Mark asked. We do, but they're only designed to withstand lower levels of radiation at site, where the main bulk of it's worn off. But with these kinds of readings, you'll grow ahead by the time you'll get anywhere near Godzilla and prep the nuke, Rick said. I'll go, Sarasawa whispered. All eyes fell on Sarasawa, and Aline fervently shook her head. No, there must be another way, she countered. There's no time for debate, Sarasawa said quietly. I'll take the nuke to Gojira, he said. No, no you won't, Mark said. Sarasawa sighed and turned towards him. Mark, please. You don't have to go anywhere, Sarasawa. Godzilla's what? Maybe 800 meters away from us right now, Mark asked. 1,200, Rick corrected. Okay, 1,200 meters. That's still more than close enough to set the nuke off on a remote timer from right here, Mark said. Everyone's eyes began to light up. Guys, come on. We've all seen what a nuke is capable of. That thing has a blast radius of 12 miles. It doesn't have to be point blank to be effective, he continued. He's right. He's right. We can just stop it from the nuke and set off via a remote once we clear of the blast zone. Elaine happily chimed in, grabbing Sarisawa's hand. You don't have to leave us, she whispered, her lower lip quivering. Sarasawa, both surprised and relieved, nodded slowly and gave Elaine a small hug before she walked over to Mark and jumped into his arm, nuzzling his shoulder. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, she repeated happily. Mark was a bit unsure of the situation, but he gave her a few pats on the back and let her hold on. Damn, all this stress and pressure got to us, I guess. We completely forgot how powerful nukes are, despite always using them as a reference for anti-war sentiments, Rick said with a chuckle. All right, prep the warhead, the captain ordered. Aye, sir, Bowman replied. A few minutes later, the bottom hatch opened and a diver carried the nuke directly below the sub and planted firmly against the shore, the stone ground. Setting the detonation device to manual and arming it, he swam back up into the sub, which begins a full 180-degree turn and started to move slowly back towards the enormous cavern from where it came, leaving behind this beautiful underwater and knowing that it was about to be destroyed, left Sarisara, Elaine, Rick, and even Mark with a heavy hearts. Elaine grabbed Mark's hand and suddenly wept as she watched that carving of Godzilla being worshipped pass by, and slightly shut her eyes while letting her head sink down. Mark sighed through his nose softly as he rubbed her back, causing her to lean against him. The rest of the crew was a mixture of smiles and nervous. Some twitching and tapping their feet nervously, while others were juiced and talking about how awesome it would be to have the best shot at beating Ghidorah back. And for several long minutes, they traced the way where they'd come back towards the exit to the underwater ruins. However, a problem arose. Hold it! Stop the vessel! The captain ordered. The vessel came to a halt in the middle of the opening, and everyone gathered around him. The signal is starting to get sketchy. If we go too much further, we might not be able to set it off, he said. Aaron saw and heard the signal beginning to cut briefly as the remote was held up. What do we do? Rick asked. We've got no choice but to detonate from here, the captain said. Wait, if we do that, we'll all be caught in the blast, Rick countered. I know, the captain said on a sigh. We can't risk going any further. We're almost out of time, Mark said. No, with the signal getting this glitchy, we can run the risk of the nuke losing connection entirely, and we have to detonate from here or there's not going to be an explosion at all, the captain retorted. Aaron's shoulders slouched as a wave of defeat overcame. I'll do it, came a voice from the back of the room. All eyes turned toward the source of a young man as the young man came forward, saluting the captain. Sir, it will be my honor to remain behind to detonate the nuke upon your order, he said. Looking at the young sailor's name on his uniform, the captain sighed calmly and through his nose and put a hand on his shoulder. Petty officer, second class, Steve Martin. This job is yours, he replied, handing the detonator to the young sailor. Yes, sir, Steve shouted with a salute. Throughout the room swept a wave of both relief and sadness. This young officer was preparing to sacrifice himself for good of all, a true patriot and a model sailor in the United States Navy. Prep for dive, son. Not to put pressure on you. Pardon the pun, but the water pressures out there is going to be very intense this far now. You need to hold out until I give the order, son. Think you can handle it? The captain asked. Aye, sir. The captain smiled. Let's go then, he said. A minute later, Petty Officer Steve Martin exited the sub through the lower hatch, holding tight to the remote and with a calm link in his ears. He listened to the captain's instruction one last time. Godspeed, son, the captain said after relaying the instruction. Aye, sir, and sir? Yes, son? Please. Take the camera in my room and deliver it to my fiancée. She'll want to see some other picture I took on deployment when it comes home, he said quietly. The captain's lower lip quivered and tightened. He closed his eyes tightly before finally forming a response. You got it, son. I'll deliver it personally. That's a promise, he replied. Thank you, sir, Steve said. The entire room was swept away by Petty Officer Martin's bravery and his acceptance of his fate. Elaine broke down in tears as did many of the Petty Officer Martin's friends and brothers in arms throughout the room. Even the captain was hiding the fact that he was crying beneath his cap. Full speed ahead, he ordered through a sob. Aye, sir, Bowman sniffled. The sub raced away at full speed as its lights faded. Steve could no longer see anything. It was pitch black all around. He couldn't even see the remote. Captain, we're clear of the blast zone, Bowman said quietly. Understood. Steve, you're still with me? Silence. Steve? Petty Officer Steve Martin, can you hear me? The captain asked forcefully. Yes. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. It's really cold, Steve replied as a wave of relief overcame the crew. It's time, son, the captain said softly. Aye, sir. Time to bring him back to us, Steve replied. As they heard on the audio feed was a click. Within seconds, the feed cuts out and gave way to a static buzzing as the light of the nuke's explosion turned night into day on the ocean floor. Once again, all within the sub felt a combination of relief and sadness. Relief that the mission was now a success, but sadness for the passing of a brave and noble soul like Steve Martin. The sub broke the service, and Mark, Elaine, and Sarasava and Rick all walked out, with the captain as the rain pelted at them from overhead. See nothing? See anything? Elaine asked. Not yet, Rick asked, looking through his binoculars. Hey, not to throw mud on what happened, but what if it didn't work? Rick asked. Dr. Stanton, if you question the sacrifice of that young man again, I will personally see to it that you are removed from Monarch upon our return. Sarah barked, causing Rick to step back and put his hand in, up in acceptance of the threat. Sarah walked beside Mark. Anything? He asked. Wait. Yes, Mark called. Something happening. In the waters over there, he shouted, pointing out to the sea. A maelstrom began forming in the water a few hundred meters away from the sub, and as they gathered around Mark and looked out towards it, steam begins to rise from its center. But not only that, from within the core of the maelstrom begins to shine a familiar blue light. Godzilla's spines erupted beneath the water, flashing and pulsing with that oh so welcome light, reminiscent of Cherenkov lights in nuclear reactors. Following his spines was his head, his back straightening while he floated vertically from waist up with a fierce snarl on his face, and with a single roll, he released his thermonuclear breath straight on into the skies above in the divine demonstration of power. As the breath came to an end, he spied the sub and leaned down towards it, much to the fear of the crew. A small snarl formed on his face as he sniffed at the vessels. Nobody move, Mark called. Godzilla's eyes landed squarely on Mark and the others, and for a long moment they all stared back at him. As the moments passed, Godzilla's face softened as a look similar to recognition crossed his feature, rising and turning away, but not before sharing one final glance back towards the tiny humans on the sub. Godzilla dove beneath the surface and slowly disappeared from view.